be, their anger would be impotent. They would mutter, "Try that in a small town," to themselves, indulging in meaningless fantasies of revenge against the liberals and urbanites they despise. But they are not disempowered. In fact, in critical ways, they have more power than any other large demographic group in America. This power has already distorted the outcomes our system produces, leaving us in an age of minority rule in which, to take just one example, the party that won fewer votes in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections managed to assemble an activist 6-3 supermajority on the Supreme Court, one that is now busy remaking the laws all of us live under to conform to a right-wing policy vision that overwhelming majorities of the public do not share. This minority rule is a consequence of the disproportionate power wielded by rural whites, power that is often justified on the right by the insistence that these are the worthiest Americans, the ones most possessed of virtue and values, and that, therefore, it is only proper that their votes count for more. The fact that their votes do count for more is why Donald Trump became president in the first place. And if he should regain the White House, it will be rural whites who return him there. Yet even as the threat to American democracy Trump represents has become the subject of enormous concern and debate, few have connected that threat to its essential source: rural white America. Name a force or impulse that threatens the stability of the American political system: distrust in the fairness of elections, conspiracy theorizing, the embrace of authoritarianism, and it's almost always more prevalent among rural whites than among those living elsewhere. Even as they are in some ways the greatest beneficiaries of democracy's distribution of influence, rural whites are the least committed to our system. While at various times in American history some extraordinarily creative and progressive movements began in rural areas, today most of rural America is gripped by a right-wing politics that is angry when it should be constructive, and passive when it should be engaged. To many of the most cynical and malevolent characters in the political world, this is all part of the plan. Keep rural Americans bitter, and they'll be an easily manipulated force of destruction when democracy doesn't produce the proper results. The worse rural Americans feel, the better this plan works. The devastating force of late-stage capitalism has inflicted enormous damage on rural Americans. But we are more concerned with how the political system responded and, specifically, why so few rural Americans have noticed that they've been exploited and lied to by the conservative politicians they elect. Their own leaders deploy a sophisticated propaganda system meant to ensure that every problem rural America faces will be blamed on faraway forces and people who have little, if any, actual influence on rural Americans' lives. It's the best way to stoke the voters' seething. That and telling them the solution to their problems will always be to elect more conservative Republicans who will continue to spend more effort in ratcheting up rural anger than in addressing the problems confronting rural communities. So, when urban America suffers from a spike in unemployment or violent crime, the right-wing noise machine quickly points its collective finger at liberals, minorities, and Democrats who dominate cities. Cities, they are told, are both nightmares of depravity and a threat to rural Americans. But when rural America suffers from precisely these same problems, who gets blamed? Those same liberals, minorities, and Democrats from faraway, scary cities. Almost daily, hourly on talk radio stations from Maine to Maui, those constituents hear Republican politicians and their conservative allies in the media redirect rural fury toward the boogeyman of the moment: immigrant caravans this month